shop to write his novel. Note how the characters of the story are not able to jump out of the book and accompany the author at his local coffee shop. I feel that there is a connection between the contingency argument and anxiety. In college and at every aspect of our lives, we are met by challenges which induce anxiety. As a fourth year medical student, I understand that many suffer from mental illness and anxiety disorders such as generalized anxiety disorder. I realize that many suffer from pathology that requires medication and professional cognitive behavioral therapy to manage. I hope not to give off the impression that all anxiety is something we can just, quote, pray away. However, even for those of us who are not diagnosed with a mental illness, we still experience underlying anxiety. Where does this come from? C.S. Lewis hypothesized, and I believe correctly, that our anxiety and fear is ultimately derived from the fear of death. I think that we will notice some familiar terminology from the contingency argument above. We exist in time and space, and our existence is contingent on other things. Time. We will eventually die one day. Space. There may be an earthquake or tornado that can threaten our life. Contingency. Without food, hospitals, or medication, we will die. Many of our fears and anxieties in life rely on the fact that we are contingent on so many other things which we cannot control for our way of life and our being. In order to have less anxiety, we need to rely ultimately upon something, which is God, that exists outside of space, time, and is not contingent in his being on anything else. At some point during my freshman year of college, I already had the realization that some supreme being must exist, but I was challenged by what I call the problem of other religions. If there are so many other religions and they all think that they have the correct understanding of God and some sort of path which we should follow to please God, how can I be sure that my religion is true? Especially when we have it pounded into our heads through secular education that all religions are essentially the same. I once heard an argument made by an atheist that one would be naive to say that their one religion out of 4,000 is true while denying the other 3,999. However, the atheist must deny not just 3,999 religions, but 4,000. Relying solely on their own understanding of things and their moral interpretation. In fact, one could say that these people would really have to believe in themselves to not believe in God. As G.K. Chesterton said, the men who really believe in themselves are all in lunatic asylums. Another way to look at the problem of religions, or the fact that there are 4,000 religions, is that we have something innate within us that leads us to God. As there are so many religions from various ages, cultures, and geographic locations, it is part of our own nature to pray, worship, and search for the ultimate cause of our existence. Even many atheists will instinctually pray in times of crisis. Back to the problem of other religions. What makes Christianity distinctly unique from those other 4,000 religions? C.S. Lewis saw that all religions were man's search for God and attempt to understand what God wanted from them. Christianity is unique in that it is God coming down into the world incarnate in the second part of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, and revealing himself to us through divine revelation. It is truly a religion not only of our quest for God, but for God's quest for relationship with and love of man. This is one way in which it is qualitatively different from other religions. As you may remember, relativism, which is the idea that morality, truth, and knowledge are not absolute and just exist in relation to culture, perspective, and historical context, is one of the 4 reasons I previously discussed as a reason for people leaving Christianity. I'm good, you're good, do whatever feels right. We make definitive claims about science all the time. However, we often believe it is inherently wrong and judgmental to make definitive and bold statements about religion or morality. It is important to hold the distinction between loving someone and disagreeing with what they say. To love someone does not mean that we should affirm every decision that person makes. Disagreeing with someone, likewise, does not mean that you hate him or her. It is important to understand that truth is objective rather than subjective. An example of subjective truth is stating that the Nazis were right in the operation of concentration camps because the scapegoating of Jewish people is part of their subjective truth and we shouldn't judge them. When we lose this concept of objective truth, we end up with slavery, ethnic cleansing, abortion, and mass genocide. By allowing the always changing popular opinion or law of any specific state or government to dictate our moral values and ethical standards, rather than aligning ourselves to our Christian faith, we are capable of committing similar atrocities. I will attempt here my own version of G.K. Chesterton-like analogy with modern characters and references. Imagine a scenario in which Bob Ross, standing as usual, is painting a canvas portrait of LeBron James sitting in a folding chair on a Saturday morning in LeBron's mansion. Bob Ross is painting along and dropping lines like, "We don't make mistakes, just happy little accidents," or "There's nothing wrong with having a tree as a friend." When LeBron needs to step out of the room to take his talents to the kitchen for breakfast, LeBron asks Mr. Ross to keep painting his portrait even when he is not in the folding chair. Patrick Mahomes, who happens to be hanging out with LeBron, then enters the room and sits in the folding chair. Mr. Ross tries to continue the portrait with the star quarterback as his reference. After a time, Mahomes leaves to go design plays for his Ferrari Wright package, and in steps Simone Biles, and the saga continues. No matter how great of an artist Bob Ross is, eventually his painting will look rather odd, and likely nothing resembling LeBron James. With Mr. Ross's original goal to paint a great portrait of LeBron James in mind, what can we gather from this story? In this situation, the modern thinker is Bob Ross, and the athlete he is trying to draw resembles our ultimate concern and direction in life. G.K. Chesterton points out, using our above metaphor, that Mr. Ross would be better off drawing a beautiful portrait of LeBron if he crumpled up the picture and his painting and started from scratch, focusing his time and energy on the painting itself rather than switching out which athlete he is drawing a picture of. In our own life, we should keep the person we are trying to draw a picture of, loving God as the most important thing in our life, constant, and work on how we can better love others and refrain from sin. If the most important thing in our life is not consistently loving God and rather changes from our occupation to making others happy to the generation of wealth or seeking pleasures day to day like Bob Ross's painting, the picture of our lives will look rather odd. The following quote from the great Archbishop Fulton Sheen applies here. It is a characteristic of any decaying civilization that the great masses of people are unaware of the tragedy. Humanity in a crisis is generally insensitive to the gravity of the times in which it lives. Men do not want to believe their own times are wicked, partly because they have no standard outside of themselves by which to measure their times. If there is no fixed concept of justice, how shall men know it is violated? Only those who live by faith really know what is happening in their world. The great masses without faith are unconscious of the destructive processes going on because they have lost the vision of the heights from which they have fallen. The world tries to domesticate Jesus as just another great teacher, someone who is on the same field as Socrates, Confucius, Aristotle, Muhammad, Buddha, and Gandhi. C.S. Lewis gracefully articulates the trilemma of Jesus Christ as being either liar, lunatic, or Lord. Since Jesus claimed that he himself was God, then he is either true God and true man, in which we shall give over our lives to serving him, a madman who is unintentionally deceiving, or someone who is intentionally trying to mislead others to believe he is the Son of God, making him a blasphemer. Confucius claims to have discovered a way to live an uplifting life, and Muhammad claims that the divine truth was communicated to him and that his job was to relay that message to his followers. None of these other prophets ever claimed to be God. Jesus states, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." This makes Jesus qualitatively different in his assertions than these other people. In academic circles today, Jesus is often seen as this wishy-washy figure and as a great teacher, but nothing else. However, if we study who Jesus was and who he said he was, this middle ground cannot exist. We would be hard-pressed to think that Jesus was crucified in his time because he was a great moral teacher. Rather, it was precisely this decision and distinction that he forced upon those in his time that led to his crucifixion, and that we have to discern in our own life as to who Jesus was. Hopefully, we do not choose wrongly, as the Roman government and Jewish officials did that historical day at Golgotha, for that may truly put us on the wrong side of history. Modern or new atheists claim that their objections to religion are due to further scientific and technological advancements, and thus being an atheist is part of human advancement and is inevitable. However, upon further reading, it is easy to see that ever since Christ rose from the dead, Christians from Augustine to Aquinas to C.S. Lewis to today's apologists have had to defend the faith against the same recycled objections to Christianity. There is really nothing new or novel in the objections that the new atheists raise. They rather utilize a different articulation to fit our current culture. Here is a quote from G.K. Chesterton's book Orthodoxy, written in 1908, about atheistic objections during his time. First, for instance, that Jesus was a gentle creature, sheepish and unworldly, a mere ineffectual appeal to the world. Second, that Christianity arose and flourished in the dark ages of ignorance, and that these the church would drag us back. Third, that the people still strongly religious, or, if you will, superstitious, are weak, unpractical, and behind the times. Do these sound similar to arguments that are presented now by new atheism? They appear to have newfound knowledge that will disprove God, but these arguments have been here long before these New Age atheists were even born. G.K. Chesterton said, "The skeptic has alternated between telling us to be true Christians and to do it, and explaining that it is impossible to do. When he is a communist as well as an atheist, he is generally doubtful whether to blame us for preaching what is impractical or for not instantly putting it into practice." He also stated that it looked not so much as if Christianity was bad enough to include any vices, but rather as if any stick was good enough to beat Christianity with. The above quotes apply in the current criticisms of Christianity by the academic realm and also applied at the time of Jesus' ministry. If we look at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 18 through 19, "For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they said, He is possessed by a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they said, Look, he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." As we just discussed, the current objections to religion or Christianity are not new, rather they have been around for hundreds and thousands of years. One refreshing thing we are to gain from reading the works of the Christian fathers, such as the Confessions of St. Augustine in year 400 AD, St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae written in 1274 AD, and Dante's Divine Comedy written in 1320 AD, is the realization that people have wrestled with similar theological questions since the birth of Christianity. These authors were devoutly religious, of superior intelligence, and were not afraid to ask and seek the answers to questions of ultimate concern. Why is there evil and suffering? Is there really a God? What is God's relevance in my life? There are a few options as to what we can do with such questions. We should not put our head in the sand and try to suppress these questions, for this creates cognitive dissonance, resulting in distress, which over time can ultimately lead to further doubt and loss of faith. It is also easier to abandon your faith instead of taking the effort to address these concerns. I hope that we decide to seek these answers within our Christian faith and gain a deeper and more vigorous faith in the process. The Blessed John Henry Newman explained in his book, The Grammar of Assent, much more comprehensively than what I will relay here, the relation between our assent to a certain truth and the proofs behind that assent. Assent, essentially, is how we come to the knowledge that a given thing is true. In this case, if we are Christians, we necessarily must assent to the concept that God exists. This assent, like all assent, is obviously based on certain proofs and life experiences. In order to strengthen our assent that God is true, we must reinforce our assent to the individual proofs which ultimately lead us towards this understanding. This is done by reading the Bible, attending religious services, experiencing God in prayer, and through theological reading. You have probably heard the phrase, if something is worth doing, it will be difficult. How could anything be more worth your time, energy, and effort than your faith? The answers are out there, and with the internet in